What if the most dangerous outcome for Kobu isn't necessarily dying at the hands of Mamushi like he's being set up at the end of chapter 30 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex? Because here's the thing, in Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, death isn't the worst thing that can happen to you anymore. That's changed. We have evolved beyond life or death situations. Being erased from the timeline, that's bad. Being devoured by a Ten Tails offshoot and reborn as something that should not exist, now that, in my opinion, that is a lot worse. And right now, you could argue there's a real possibility that Kobu might be walking straight towards an outcome that Kashin Koji himself never planned for, probably didn't want, and may have accidentally ended up creating himself. The ultimate irony given how much he gets on the boards about changing the timeline. So join me in today's newest Naruto Explained video where your OBC, your original Boruto chief, is going to be talking to you about the possibility, not necessarily the certainty, because I'm a little skeptical on this, that Kobu could be eaten by Mamushi and survive in the worst possible way and emerge as something brand new, a Shinju. Now, let me be clear from the very start. I am skeptical. There are rule inconsistencies that have me a little bit worried here, but I've seen enough people talk about in the comment section that I did want to kind of get my thoughts on it. So there are payoff concerns in my opinion. If you disagree, let me know down in the comment section. I really want to know. I really want this to be a good topic of discussion. And I do think that there's a massive precedent that works against this idea. But if it happens, it could be one of the most disturbing and ironically poetic plot twists ever that Boruto's pull. And I am laughing because I do not like Kobu's character. I don't hate him. I don't think that he's evil. He's an antagonist in the sense that he's standing between Boruto and his goal, but the guy's just doing his job. But I said to say this, like if the guy gets turned to a Shinju, if he dies, I don't necessarily care. But let's break it all down. So Kashin Koji's goal is not necessarily about saving lives. He could care less how many people live or die. The only thing he cares about is preserving a timeline. At the center of that entire situation with anything that Kashin Koji does is Kashin Koji's philosophy. It's never been about morality. It's always been about outcomes. It's a reason I really enjoy Kashin Koji's character so much. Koji isn't trying to protect Kobu. He's trying to protect Shikamaru Nara as the 8th Hokage. The moment that Shikamaru is no longer useful, he could give a damn about Shikamaru. Because based on what Kashin Koji said, and based on what it's implied he's seen, in the futures that Koji saw, if Shikamaru is removed as Hokage, that causes a cascade of failures that make it a little bit harder, not necessarily easier to defeat Jura. And he's trying to basically stack the deck. No unnecessary risk. Let's just pivot the timeline to where Jura's erased. So when you have a situation like what is being set up now, where Kobu has discovered that Shikamaru is involved with Boruto, he's basically saying he's gathering evidence and he's gonna get Shikamaru moved as Hokage. Kashin Koji made a brutal calculation. He saw something where he's like, yeah, Kobu knows, he's got proof, we gotta get rid of this guy. Well, here's the interesting thing. He basically says, we gotta remove Kobu at all costs. Not arrest him, not discredit him. Instead, he's gotta be removed. And by removed, I mean we gotta put a bullet in this guy's head. And since Koji doesn't necessarily want to pull the trigger himself, he sets up something far worse. He first tried to get Inojin to do it. Inojin wouldn't do it. So he's like, okay, Mamushi, you're right there. You can be useful. But here's the thing. Mamushi was never supposed to be a weapon. The outcome itself was supposed to be the weapon though. Kashin Koji's decision to attack Mamushi in this moment in time, it is critical. This wasn't reckless. This was engineered. Kashin Koji understands Mamushi's nature, aggressive, reactive, drawn to perceived threats. As long as you don't directly attack Mamushi, he could give two damns about you. But if you stand between him and Ada, or if you attack him, then he's gonna come after you. By provoking Mamushi, Kashin Koji creates a scenario where Kobu becomes collateral damage. It's clean, it's indirect, and it is predictable. Everybody has plausible deniability at that point, except this one problem. Inojin might end up being a variable that Kashin Koji cannot control. And as I said in the chapter review, even though I understood like Koji's kind of pulling a page out of the book of Makima level of gaslighting, the difference with someone like Koji and Makima is that Makima, before she did the gaslighting, she had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with various characters. Koji and Inojin, they haven't necessarily spent a lot of time together, so it's not as effective. And I think that's where we got to kind of circle back to Inojin Yamanaka. Through his mind transfer jutsu, Inojin is literally inside of Kobu's body, and that changes everything. Koji's plan basically assumes that Kobu will react like Kobu because Inojin will break free. But right now, Inojin is still in control, which means that Kobu's going to react like Inojin. Inojin is a shinobi. Inojin staying consistent when Mamushi starts trying to attack. Even though Kobu's body may be completely dumpy, Inojin's going to be able to move out of the way. Right now, Inojin does not want Kobu to die. And that hesitation matters. It matters a lot. And it's not just the hesitation, it's the distinction. That distinction matters a lot. Because in Boruto, hesitation is often the difference between death and something far worse. Go back to what was set up when Kashin Koji was explaining everything to Inojin. He talks about the fact that if somebody's supposed to die and there's a hesitation or they don't do what they're supposed to, it creates a worst possible future. And you see how Inojin was written as being somebody that was questioning that? I think we may be getting a payoff for it. If Inojin stalls, if Mamushi doesn't kill Kobu outright, then I think we may be entering into a dangerous territory. And it kind of comes into a Shinju question here. What happens if Mamushi himself eats Kobu? And I think that's where it gets very interesting and potentially controversial based on everything that we have so far. We know for absolute certain, based on what we've seen in the manga so far, being consumed by a claw grind, the regular run-of-the-mill bootleg Frieza claw grind, it results in a Shinju creation. That's established. But Mamushi is not a claw grind per se. Mamushi is what we could basically call a awakened Shinju. He is made based off of somebody else's chakra. He's already evolved. He's already conscious. That opens up a potential rules gap. We don't know if an awakened Shinju consuming a human converts them, absorbs them, or if it simply kills them. And on that last point, I would more so say it probably does kill them based on Kashin Koji's words. He said that Ada was dead in that alternate timeline. Mamushi ate her. She was inside that tree. So Ada's dead. That uncertainty, that's basically a backbone that I think we have to look at here. If Mamushi eats Kobu without killing him immediately, that 10 tells biology, it could attempt assimilation rather than annihilation. If that happens, and say Kobu doesn't die, say he ends up transforming into an awakened Shinju, I mean, I like the idea, but at the same time I don't. Simply for the fact it kind of would feel like you're just dragging out this Jura situation. We're clearly winding down the threats around Jura, building up to an eventual clash with Jura. I don't necessarily think that this is the move. Like after Mamushi, Hidari's probably going to be the next Shinju that we end up getting an extended sequence with. And that's part of why I'm a little bit skeptical, because again, we have that Ada precedent. So I do think, again, we have to pump the brakes on this part. Kashin Koji explicitly tells us about that alternate timeline where Ada is killed by Mamushi. Not transformed, not converted, killed. That matters. If Mamushi consuming Ada resulted in death, not Shinju creation, then the safest assumption would be that Kobu would suffer a similar fate, which that makes this entire thing speculative by design. But like, that's the whole point. We discuss things and we look at the pros and cons, etc. That's part of the fun of following an ongoing series. That's completely okay. And I do think it is worth noting, like, Boruto as a series does have a habit of at times subverting expectations and assumptions when conditions change. And Kobu's situation, it could be presented as something different. Kobu himself is a character that is presented different from what we've traditionally seen with aides of feudal lords. When you go back to Naruto's manga, they were just kind of there. Kobu, he's actually relatively involved. Ikimoto's actually exploring the political side of Naruto pretty in depth at this point. He's not necessarily sprinkling it in, he's making it a core subplot. And he's taking it a step further. This isn't about jockeying for position for the Hokage title or anything of that nature. This is the Hokage and the Hokage's boss and the Hokage's go-between between the elders and Kobu and feudal lord. All these things are at play here. I like seeing this political side. So I will put my bias out there. I don't want Kobu gone because I do want to see more of Kobu in this role. But I do think, again, Kobu does have a unique case that is worth looking at. Unlike Ada, Kobu is in a situation where he is central to a political power struggle. So if Kobu becomes a Shinju, the narrative payoff wouldn't necessarily be personal. It will be political. If Kashin Koji accidentally ends up making a Kobu Shinju because of all of this, you would have to think that Kobu's target will probably be Shikamaru, which means that Koji ends up putting Shikamaru in greater danger. That could be your payoff. That could be your fallout. And even if it isn't, just the fallout in general, the feudal lord losing his chancellor is a big deal. Shinju influence gaining more insight into human governance, that's a big deal. Shikamaru being blamed for a fate worse than death for someone like Kobu, that's a big deal. That would accelerate the fracture between the ninja authority and the civilian power that lords over them. And that's the only version of this twist that I do think could work. But again, I do have some concerns. I worry that this might be the weakest payoff point. And that's really where my skepticism comes into play. If Kobu becomes a Shinju and nothing changes politically, then the transformation, in my opinion, is hollow. Boruto as a series doesn't necessarily do hollow transformations. Every Shinju so far, every awakened Shinju, they represent a narrative escalation or a thematic mirror or a philosophical challenge. Kobu as a Shinju only works if it further destabilizes leadership, deepens the distrust in the shinobi system, or directly complicates Jura's endgame. Without that, it's kind of shock value. And one thing I do like about Boruto's story so far is that, especially in part 2, it's moved beyond having to use shock value. To use a pro wrestling reference, turning Kobu into a Shinju would be like a wrestler name dropping a bunch of different people in order to get cheap pops because they can't generate their own heat. Like, don't get me wrong, Boruto has used elements of what you would expect from Gateway Shonen. Like I've always said, cliches are not a bad thing. Cliches are tried and true and tested elements in writing. The difference is a great writer understands this is a cliche, but how do I put my own spin on it? How do I make it something that is my personal take on it? That's why you'll hear someone like myself with a literature background say it, or if you listen to authors talk, they'll talk about the writer's voice. The voice of a writer can take a cliche and completely flip it on its head. Boruto has used stuff that wouldn't necessarily be original, and this would fall into that category. This would not be an original take, but based on what we've seen, I do think that that duo of Kishimoto and Ikimoto, and especially with the editor assigned to Boruto, given their track record, because this editor in general has been assigned to series like Don to Don, Spy Family, Chainsaw Man. They worked on Demon Slayer. There's a good track record there. Those are series that have used cliches but have flipped them on their head. And I can say that as a big fan of all those series. They flip cliches on their head. I do think that there's potential. If you do it, this could work. Again, I am skeptical, but there is a silver lining. It could work. The irony in this situation is, again, I do think that Kashin Koji, if this happens, he may have created his own future that he fears. And that's kind of poetic. Koji's warned repeatedly, knowing the future and acting to change it can make outcomes worse if you don't follow certain steps. And yet here he is potentially forcing events, removing variables, engineering death. And if it backfires because things didn't go according to plan, then Kashin Koji basically did the very thing he got on to Boruto about. And Boruto, being a smartass, will rub his face in it. And that's why I say you have a chance to really flip the cliche, because we've been building this Boruto and Kashin Koji bubble to where it's eventually going to burst. And having Koji pull off a screw up like this, that's going to add more fuel to the fire. That's going to make that Boruto versus Kashin Koji moment where I don't think it's fisticuffs, but it's going to make that moment something that is going to have a huge payoff. Pistol to my head, I think this is a cool idea, but I don't necessarily think that Kobu becoming a Shinju is the best thing to do. The rules aren't solid enough. The Ada precedent does work against it, but a payoff isn't guaranteed, but if it happens, it would be cool. It'd be a disturbing evolution of Telltale's lore. It'd be a brutal consequence of Koji's philosophy, and a reminder that in Boruto, survival isn't always just about mercy or how powerful you are. I do believe there is a plot twist coming with Kobu. I'm just not convinced this is the plot twist. Still, if it is, it would be a very pleasant surprise, and Boruto has earned the opportunity to do that. Obviously, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, clicking on the left to check out more Naruto Explained videos, or clicking on the right to check out this video from my Anime Explained channel where I talk about non-Naruto anime and manga.